the saga continues. You can see the first part. I ended up having to have the FJ towed because the caliper was locking up on this side and just wouldn't release it. So today we're going to dig into it, figure out what it is for sure, and more than likely replace the caliper. So here we go. So we've got her all jacked up. We got one jack stand over to the right on the frame, one jack stand over to the left on the frame. And I just put the floor jack up close to a cross member on the frame, just in case one of the jack stands fails, so that will catch it. It's not actually touching. I'm going to use a 21mm socket. Pop these mud nuts off. I'm just going to lay this tire on the ground and slide underneath the vehicle as one more precaution in case the jack stand were to fail. So with the wheel off, we can take a look at the caliper here. You can see it's in pretty good shape. It's only a year or two old, so I'm kind of surprised it may have failed at this point. But if we look around it, we can see some little rust spots here and there, so it does have a little age on it. But we look in here, you can see the one of these retainer rings for a rubber cover on one of the pistons that squeezes the brake pad. It has a little rust. You can see that, maybe you can't. But anyway, I'm going to do a test, and this is about as definitive as I get to decide whether it's the caliper or a physical blockage in the line, or possibly the hydraulic modulator further up in, which is what controls the ABS and traction control. So what I'm going to do is pump the brake pedal 3 or 4 times, and I'm going to come out, crack open the bleeder screw right here, and if fluid comes squirting out of that like it's under pressure, then I know that it's probably going to be a physical blockage up in the line, or the hydraulic modulator that's gone bad, which is, again, very, very unlikely. So if fluid comes out just kind of at the rate that it would if it was just draining out of the caliper in the line, so it doesn't come out under pressure, but it does flow out, then I'll know that's probably the caliper that's bad, because there's no back pressure further up in the system. Not sure how visible that is, but this is just kind of dribbling out, so based on that alone, I'm going to say this is a bad caliper, and I'm going to go ahead and replace it. So if we look in here, we can see there's the bolt down here, and the bolt right up here, and these are what holds the caliper onto the spindle. And then we have the brake line. So the order I'm going to do this, I'm going to totally remove the bottom bolt here. I'm going to loosen the top bolt. Then I'm going to take off the brake line, finish removing this bolt, get the new caliper slided on, get this bolt threaded in, put the brake line back on, and then finish threading in both of these bolts. That way we can minimize fluid loss. We don't want to let the master cylinder run dry, which is up in the engine bay. If we do, it can be a pain priming all the air out of the master cylinder. And just would rather not deal with that. One option is to take, they have a special tool that can clamp off this rubber brake line to prevent fluid from flowing through. And that's fine, plenty of people do it. But there is a slight risk of collapsing the inside of the line, and I prefer not to deal with that, especially since this is a 10-year-old line. Brake fluid does have properties in it that prevent rubber from drying out, so even though this is a rubber line on the outside, it looks okay. It doesn't look like it's dry rotting or anything, but the inside is going to be in much better shape than the outside because of the properties that are in brake fluid. So that's just a little side note, but anyway, so I don't want to clamp this line and risk collapsing it, especially since it's a 10-year-old line. So these bolts that hold the caliper onto the spindle are actually 17mm. I just went and put the key in the ignition and turn it to accessory so we can unlock the steering wheel. allow us to turn the spindle like this. So get better access to these bolts. I went down to local Napa, picked up a new caliper. It is a reman. The only place I could find to buy non-remanufactured was a Toyota dealer, but they're like $300 there. This was, I think, 87 from Napa. As far as local parts stores go, they generally seem to have the best quality, much better than AutoZone, in my opinion. It also comes with new pins for the brake pads and clips for the brake pads as well. So we've got a 10mm flare nut wrench here. Flare nut wrench is important to use on brake fittings because they have a tendency to strip. And what the flare nut wrench does is it gives us a lot more points of contact around this nut than a standard combination wrench would. But before I use this, I'm going to use a wire brush to clean up around the threads here a little bit so we don't get any contaminants coming into the line. It would be more important to do this if we were keeping the caliper, but I still would rather get the contaminants off of the threads before we introduce the new caliper to the system. So I have a steel brush right here, steel, brass, it really doesn't matter, they're both going to take the flakes off. We do want to be careful on this line right here, because this does appear to have a plastic rust protective coating on it. We don't want to dig into that too much with the brush. Create a spot for salt and water to get in and rust it away. So with that all taken care of, we'll grab the flare nut wrench. And as I'm doing this, I'm watching to make sure this line doesn't start to spin. If it does start to spin, then there's really not a whole lot we can do about it. We're just going to need to replace the line. And we would just be able to go down to the auto parts store and get whatever this is, probably a 6/8 inch section of pre-flared line with these fittings on it, and just be able to bend it up ourselves into that shape. Or we go down to the local Toyota dealer and have them order the part as well. Plenty of fluid starting to come out. I've got a drip pan underneath here to catch everything. Now, if I thought I was going to have this line disconnected from the caliper for more than a few minutes, I would pop the hood and keep an eye on brake fluid level in the master cylinder, just to make sure we're not getting too low, and hop up there and add any as needed. But I don't foresee this taking that long. Alright, we're fully unthreaded there. Now I'm going to finish removing the bolts holding the caliper to the spindle using the 17. So since this caliper is seized on here, it's probably going to need a little bit of persuasion to come off, so we'll try Junior first before we go on to Grandpa. Highly recommend gloves. Brake fluid just sucks to get on your hands. Alright, I'm going to set this aside for now. Would have been smart if I had put some cardboard down first. Leak all over the floor. You can see I went ahead and put a light coating of anti-seize around the hub. I usually do this when I do brakes because, at least in the part of the country where I'm at, If you don't take your rotors off for a year or two, they can end up rusting right onto the hub, right around this lip pretty much, and you should just kind of spread some between the studs for good measure. That's just what I do, and it's worked out quite well for me, so I will continue to do it. I'm just going to take a lug nut and thread it on to hold it in place to make the caliper easier to put back on. Remove the caliper. And I cleaned all the rust off of this bolt with a wire brush, and I just put a very, very small dab of anti-seize on here because of how much trouble I had getting it off. I don't recommend using anti-seize on brake parts. I've had pretty bad luck with that, so I don't recommend anyone else do it. So in order to get even a little more movement out of this line, I'm going to take this bracket off. So we're just going to 12mm on here. We want to be super, super careful not to cross thread this when it's going in. So in order to do that, it needs to be perfectly aligned, which is why I undid both of these things up here. And we'll make those fit back in place once this brake line is fully connected and seated. I got this back bent. Both of these bends ended up bending a little more so that we can get this to where it needed to be. Now it's just about where it needs to be, but I don't want to put pressure on this fitting yet. So I'm just going to leave this loose right here, and I know I'll be able to make it work. And I know that this is where, about the angle that the line needs to be at for it to work. I'm going to snug up this fitting into the caliper now. Again, I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit, just to try to find the middle of it, because what we're looking at is, we basically, I should have showed before, but we have a little bit of a cone inside of the caliper, so that sticks up and there's a little hole in it where the brake fluid goes, and then this brake line has a flared end that needs to fit over that cone and seat properly. So that's what I'm working on now. So I'm just going to put pressure straight in to try to center it, and then just kind of make sure it looks centered as well. Snug her down. Alright, so now that that's snugged up, we'll go ahead and put this part back on here. This bolt I will put some anti-seize on because it's not absolutely critical if it loosens up and falls out. Now if I lived in a rust-free climate, which I certainly hope to someday, I would use more thread lock than I do. Living in the rusty, crusty north, rust is essentially my thread locker. So if I come across a bolt that I don't want to fall out and it's already pretty rusty, I usually won't put thread lock on it. But that's just a personal thing. By all means, if thread lock is needed for safety, then definitely use thread lock. That's just kind of the way that I go working on my own vehicles. If I was working on somebody else's vehicle, I certainly would not do that. But for my own purposes, it's just kind of the way I go. That one's fine. Oh man, 3 of these are pretty well locked up. This one right here that moves is fine. So, wow, it's this one, and this one are all pretty well locked up. It's I'm surprised that it is more than, I mean, even more than 2. 2 would have been like, that would have made sense, one on each side. But that's, wow, that's pretty bad. At this point, I'm going to clean off the caliper, clean off all the brake fluid that's spilled on here. We're just going to use a brake cleaner for that. Any generic brake cleaner will do. I absolutely won't spray brake fluid without wearing safety glasses. This stuff is nasty. You don't want to get it on your skin, and like I also won't use it without wearing gloves. Bad stuff. Works great, but not so good for you. So I'm just going to take some of this synthetic brake grease. It's specifically designed for brake systems, so it'll withstand the temperatures that brakes get to, which is quite high sometimes. So I'm just going to take a little tiny bit of this and rub it everywhere on the caliper that the pads are going to slide, taking special care not to get any on the rotor, since we just cleaned that. If I do get any on the rotor, I'll have to use some brake cleaner and clean it back off again. So just a little tiny bit is all we need. And one little packet of this stuff goes a long way. I've done plenty of brake jobs on just one packet, so if I use one packet in a sitting, I know I used way too much. This is where it's important to pay attention to how the brakes came off. Now on mine, we had this little spring clip only on the pad towards the inside of the vehicle, and these are side specific, so that's something else to note as well. Just gonna slide them in place. And the nice thing about these Toyotas is you can change the pads without even taking off the caliper. Not the case with on the Jeeps I've in the past. I'll look at that as an improvement. So we'll take the new hardware that we got with the caliper. We also got some new hardware with the pads. So just these little clips here and the spring clip that goes in the bottom. But we're going to use, for this side, we're going to use the hardware that came with this caliper. So we'll feed top pin through. And then for the bottom, we'll take this little spring clip that came with the caliper. Put that in place. This can only go one way. These little tabs right here on the outside. Pin it through. And then we'll install the cotter pins. Alright, now we are we're all installed over here and we're ready to bleed the brakes. I went ahead and replaced the other side even though it wasn't sticking, just for good measure, because if one of these goes, the other probably isn't too far behind. And that's generally the principle that you use when dealing with components side to side on a vehicle like this. So we've got new caliper and new brake pads on both sides, and it's time to bleed the brakes. And the procedure that I'm going to use for that requires 2 people. There are methods available that only use 1 person. You can make or sell a self-brake bleeder kit if there's no one else that can help with the bleeding. But I prefer the 2-person method. It seems a little more definitive to me when you finally get all the air out of the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 1 person inside the FJ pumping the brake pedal. So they're going to pump it a couple times, then hold it down. I'm going to crack open the bleeder valve right here, and when the pedal hits the floor, the person on the inside of the vehicle will let me know that the pedal's hit the floor. At that point, I'll close the valve, and I will just keep repeating that process until I don't see any more air coming out of this line. So I will put a little short piece of flexible, clear fuel line on here, so you can see air bubbles coming out. And when air bubbles stop coming out, that's when we'll know that all the air is out of the system, and we can move on to the other side. Before I start bleeding the brakes, I'm just going to take the cap off the brake fluid reservoir. Just going to loosen it up and leave it there so we can easily allow air to flow in as we're pumping fluid out through the caliper. We're going to keep an eye on this level as well. Not sure if the camera will pick it up, but the fluid level is about right here, right about at the max level on the side. Once it gets down to right around the minimum, I'm going to add more, bring it back up to max. I'll keep pumping it through. Really important not to let it go below the minimum so we don't get air in the system. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that. And then once everything's bled and we're all set to go, I'll just take the fluid and fill it right back up to max again, and that will be it. All right. Okay. Okay. Let's see the air bubbles coming out. Now with the master cylinder topped off, we'll go ahead and put the cap back on, tighten it down, and we're done under the hood. The brakes bled and everything back together. Put the tire back on, go take it for a test ride, make sure everything's working right. So two more things I didn't note in the video. I torqued these are torque specs according to the factory service manual for my specific year and model. So I would encourage anyone who's doing this to go online, find the factory service manual for their specific year, find these values as well. But the values for my year were, we had 91 foot-pounds for the 2 bolts holding the caliper to the spindle, and then 82 foot-pounds on the lug nuts. So just wanted to throw those in there. Again, if anyone is doing this job themselves, I highly encourage you to investigate these values on your own, and don't necessarily take my word for it. So I'm out taking this thing for a test ride now after finishing the work. And we're going to check the temperature to see how the brakes are working. You can see right here we have 145 on this one. That's a pretty normal temperature. That's the one that we were having a problem with. On this side we're reading 162 is a high on that side, but right around 160. And those temperatures are real close, and that's what we want to see. And these are pretty normal temperatures, so we're going to consider this a job complete, and we're now good to go. Hopefully these new remanufactured calipers will last a little longer than the old ones did. But time will tell. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and be sure to hit the subscribe button.